Welcome to the Pro Aging Podcast. I'm Steve Gurney, founder of Positive Aging Sourcebook. We're excited that you can join us for our interactive discussions with pioneers and thought leaders on a wide variety of topics related to aging and longevity. Today we have another live and interactive discussion with Debra Hallisey, author of Your Caregiver Relationship Contract. Debra leads us through a discussion that explores working through expectations, how to set caregiver boundaries, the need to structure hard conversations with mom and dad, and how to pull together a support network for caregiver self-care. So let's jump into the discussion. Button. And I am going to welcome Debra Hallisey, who is the author of Your Caregiver Relationship Contract, which is an amazing book on a topic that is long overdue, is sort of drawing that line in the sand and figuring out, what is, what are the expectations and the risks and things of that nature. But Debra, before we dive into this discussion, I always like to introduce our panel member to the audience and get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led up to you writing this book and what you do in your career.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks to everyone who joined us. So I spent 25, almost 30 years as a consultant in change management and corporate training. I worked for Ernst & Young and Huron Consulting Group and boutique firms. Not a new story. I lost my job due to caregiving issues. And it was with that I decided to found this company and pay forward the help that I had gotten when I became my mom's full-time caregiver. I started as a blogger. I'm also a certified caregiving consultant, so I work with family members, helping them find resources and helping them navigate this journey. And then this book actually came out of about 5 blog posts that I wrote that really, really resonated with my readers. My personal favorite was titled, "Today I Will Be Her Daughter and Not Her Caregiver." And I wrote that for my mom's 85th birthday because I realized as caregivers, we are so task focused that we lose the relationship between us and the person we're caring for, whether it's a husband or a child or a spouse or a child or a parent. And it's really important to be very deliberate to continue to nurture that relationship and not just be a caregiver.
Oh, I love it. Now, you've got some pretty interesting credentials, one of which I've been very impressed with, which is a certified caregiving consultant who we featured that unique program. But tell us a little bit about your training and your background.
Absolutely. So I found Denise Brown not long after I started my business. And Denise has been working in the caregiving world with family caregivers since the late 1990s. And she years ago wrote a book about the 6 stages of caregiving. And I have found that to be true. You go from kind of the expectant caregiver when you're just starting to think about it, all the way through to after you've lost your loved one. And at each stage, there are absolutely things you need, not just personally, but also resources as well. And that really resonated with me. And I wanted to really understand and be able to help people at every stage through the consulting business and writing. So I decided to, pursue that. I am now an educator for Denise. I can train on the 6 stages. And I'm also a certified dementia practitioner as well.
Great. Well, I'm delighted to have you and really excited to hear what you have to share. And I want to remind our audience that you can type in questions at any point in time and we'll make sure to get to them. And then Debra, I think you've got some PowerPoints you're going to share. Just check in with me periodically and or if something comes up, I'll sort of politely break in.
Oh, yeah, please do. Please do. Because I'm passionate about this, so I can get talking.
Oh, yeah, I love it. Okay. All right.
Let me share my screen. All right. So again, I just want to thank Steve and everybody who is on this call for your time and attention. And I want to share this picture. This is a picture of my dad. In 2014, he was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. I think the interesting thing about being a caregiver is it can become something that kind of sneaks up on you, like it did for me, because, I could see my dad not feeling well. And then in 2014, I started to accompany him to the doctors. And my dad was my mother's caregiver. So I also started trying to take some of the pressure off him in terms of caregiving. Now, having said that, I was a consultant, so I traveled Monday through Thursday. So it was quite stressful. So for me, I kind of saw it coming. But there's an interesting study that says most people become caregivers in 9 minutes, which means that you get a phone call. Your husband was in an accident, your child, whatever, your mom or dad had a stroke or a heart attack. And so, I want to educate people on what they can expect as being a family caregiver. This is at the end of a 2-week hospitalization that my dad had in November of 2014. I realized at this point we really were on borrowed time and that I was going to be responsible for my mom. And I would literally lie in bed at night and think, where do I start? And then what would I do next? Because it wasn't just my mom. It was her 57-year-old house. It was taking on her finances. It was doing the shopping and all the errands that my father had to do. And I live an hour away from my mom. So it was completely overwhelming. And what I've learned in the last 7 years as my mom caregiver is that caregiving changes your contract. And we're going to talk more about that. But it doesn't just change the relationship and the contract with the person you've become caring for. This was the big surprise to me. It changes all the relationships in your life. Because all the relationships in this life have these kind of unwritten rules, contract, if you will, about the way you are going to be in relationship. And if you're not aware of what these unwritten rules are, and you're not proactive about changing them, then you can really harm a relationship, or you can heal it. And I say that from a place of truth because my mom and I struggled growing up. I'm going to be completely honest. I was very close to my dad. My mom and I struggled. And I was really worried that becoming my mother's caregiver was going to just really break this relationship in a way that was not repairable. And so as I kind of went through and had these aha moments and realizations, I realized, you know what? We can actually heal this. And I think that's really, really important if you have had a relationship with someone that was not of the best, and now you're in the position of being their caregiver. In terms of it changing all the relationships in your life, I have come to realize that there are some friends and even family that I had to let go of for a while because they simply did not understand what it means to be my mom's caregiver. Right. And so it's not that I'm not going to pick those relationships up, but I had to come to terms with, you know what, for right now, I need to let this go. Okay. So what is a caregiver relationship contract? Well, I think of it as 3 different things. First of all, is what are you willing or not willing to do for one another? Right. So when I think about the physical tasks of caregiving, it's going for me, grocery shopping, doing the bill paying, helping my mother with personal care, right? But there are unspoken things that can really cause the problems, right? And all of a sudden they can bubble to the top and you can get very, very emotional because when you become somebody's caregiver, you might have done things for them and now you're called on to do more or do it in a different way. So we have to be honest with ourselves. Are we willing to do it? Are we able to do it? Because if we're not, we need to get really comfortable with asking for and saying yes to help. The other part of a relationship becomes how do we support one another, right? And by that, I mean, how does this person you're caring for feel loved, validated, and heard? By the same token, what makes you feel loved, validated, and heard? Right? Because if you can't give that to one another, it's really going to be very, very difficult. It's so easy to get into an argument that's really based on underlying emotions that are fueling it. And so often it's because we don't feel loved, validated, or heard. And so we need to kind of know what it is for ourselves and recognize when we feel like that's not happening, so we can ask someone for it or figure out how to let it go. And finally, it's what are the social outlets and shared interests that bind your relationship together, right? What do you love to do? So I'm going to put this in a very concrete context for you in terms of a relationship contract and those unspoken written rules. I'm going to take us out of the caregiving space, and instead, I want you to think about a couple, and one of them has lost a significant amount of weight, right? And so now, what are they still willing to do or not do for one another? Well, if part of your unwritten rules and your shared interests and your social outlet and your support was based on going out to dinner 3 times a week and going to a movie and sharing popcorn, right? You have now, in not being willing to go out to dinner, you have now changed one of those unwritten rules. And sometimes it's like, oh, let's go to dinner. And you don't say, you know what? I really don't want to go out as often because I really need to feel like I can manage this weight loss for a little while longer. Let's talk about other things we can do together until I'm feeling stronger in the weight loss. Most people don't address that issue, that unwritten rule, the way you're in relationship. Instead, they'll say, nah, I don't feel like it tonight. And you get too many, nah, I don't feel like it tonight. And your spouse is suddenly not feeling supported. And that social outlet that bound your relationship together is gone. And that can cause real problems. It takes work and it takes self-awareness to co-create a new contract. And you have to be willing to do both. Steve, any questions about the contract? Does that seem clear to you and to everybody?
Yeah, no, it's this is really interesting and yeah, really valuable too. So I think we're looking good. Oh, well, you had talked about being a certified dementia care practitioner, and R.H. Levine dropped in the certified dementia practitioner link there so that people can look into that.
Terrific. I'm so glad. Thank you for R.H. Levine for doing that.
Well, here's a comment that just popped in. It says, and I haven't read it, so this is always scary. It's like, you don't always have the opportunity to make a contract. Sometimes parents are too far gone to make that. It's difficult if they're the only one available to help.
Valid. Absolutely valid. Yes. So I don't talk about this in this particular presentation, but the very beginning of the book talks about prior to that point, right? Prior to the point where, certainly if there's a person living with dementia, they're too far gone to really have those discussions. So prior to that, there is a bunch of worksheets at the back of that chapter that allows you to think about, okay, how might they want to continue to live their life? What's the social outlets they still want to do? When do they happen? And if I can't do it, who can I call on to do it? right? The same with who's their support system. When does the garbage go out? All this kind of stuff. So the real practical physical tasks of caregiving, before we get to that point, I'm a real advocate for being proactive about this, including a worksheet on ADLs and IADLs. So you can constantly be monitoring that. Now, I will say to you that I am in the process of looking at how to rewrite this book for caregivers of dementia, people with dementia. And the reason I say that, because no, you cannot have a conversation, but, and you guys know this, your face says so much. Your tone of voice says so much. So when you're trying to redirect them, because you can't say, I need you to put your coat on, the emotions that bubble up in that moment because you're frustrated that you're not getting out the door and you're going to be late may not happen in words, but they happen in your body language. They happen in your voice, right? And so you still can impact the contract. Although if somebody's in late stage dementia, that's not true, but certainly in the beginning to the middle. So it's interesting you should comment about that, because I've come to realize that there are pieces of this idea that can work for people who are caring for someone with dementia. At least I think so.
Well, I can tell you a common theme on all of our discussions is getting people to have conversations in advance of a crisis. And so this will be real thought-provoking. And Audra Bakaitis says, amen. I've tried to get the elephant in the room paperwork done with family members, but they're not on the same page. I've done it for them myself, though. So this is great. All right, well, carry on and keep on giving us some good tips.
I will. I will just say to that last comment, my mom had a hospitalization in January, and I was absolutely mortified to have to tell the palliative care nurse we did not have a healthcare directive or a DNR, and I'm in the industry, right? I was mortified. And I'm going to talk more about how to have these, but I will tell you, because my mother and I had talked about them, and I had had her physician talk to her about it, I just couldn't get her that last step over the goalpost, right? Over the goal line. The palliative care nurse was able to get her to sign a POLST agreement, the Physician's Orders of Life-Sustaining Treatment, which frankly, since my mother will be 90 February 1st, I really am so happy to have that. So, I understand your frustration. I hope by the end of this, the techniques I use with my mom will help you. Okay, so to carry on. So if you're going to co-create a caregiver relationship, I'm going to tell you, please don't parent your caree. And caree is a term that comes from Denise's work and the 6 stages of caregiving, because I'll be honest with you, you might be caring for someone, you're struggling with the relationship. They're not necessarily your loved one. They're not necessarily your parent. Doesn't matter if it's your parent or a friend or a spouse. As caregivers, our time is so precious that without realizing, our tone of voice and the words we use are very parental. And I will tell you, knowing the work of David Solie, who wrote a book, How to Say It to Seniors, that tone of voice and the words you use and the way you present the matter are a non-starter. Okay, the you must, the you shoulds, the you need to. The other thing I want you to recognize is the changes you're asking your caree to make are emotional for both you and them. Okay, and by that I mean my mom and dad were married for 61 years when my dad died. And they had a rhythm and a way of life, an unwritten expectations and contract. And I had to honor the fact that that contract was gone when my father died. And I was going to ask her to do things differently, and that was going to be hard for her. And I have said to her more than once, Mommy, I'm really proud of you. I know this isn't easy. Thank you, for doing what you've just done. It's important that I honor that. And if you are caring for a spouse, it's the same thing. You had a way of being in relationship as a married couple for years. You get into this rhythm. You don't even realize that there are unspoken expectations, right? And that contract's going to have to change, and that's going to be hard for both of you. So if we talk about what are you willing to do or not do for one another, it becomes what are your expectations, right? And the biggest thing is that they're often unspoken. And this is what I mean by that. We all, and I challenge you to say, no, not me, we all, without realizing, think everybody would do whatever needs to be done in the exact same way I would do it, right? It's just, well, why wouldn't you? It's the way I do it. Like, you don't even think about it. You just have this expectation that they would do it the same way that you would do it, right? What I've discovered is that if somebody crosses or does something in a way I don't expect it to, oftentimes they have crossed a boundary for me, right? And when they cross that boundary, my immediate emotions are anger or frustration or whatever. They're usually not good emotions. But here's the thing. If somebody crosses a boundary because you expected them to do something in a certain way, and you haven't told them what that expectation is, you have now just blindsided them with that anger and frustration and resentment. This is where self-awareness comes in. This is where being willing to talk about it comes in. Without an honest discussion about expectations, needs, boundaries, and limits, you can really damage what is going to be basically a new relationship or relationship that's changed. I want to tell you a quick story. It's the first time, it's how I realized that there are unspoken expectations. This is my mom and I in her house with her dog. Okay. When my dad was in the hospital, I moved back in with my mother for those 2 weeks. And it was insane. I would go to the hospital for 7 o'clock in the morning to get all the doctors. I'd come home, get my mother out of bed, get her settled. I would work. I would go back to the hospital for dinner, come home at 8 o'clock, have dinner with my mother, and work. You guys have done this. If you're a caregiver, you understand what this means. For the first time, I was taking over the caregiving duties for my father in the way he was going to do it, right? So let me just focus on the bedtime routine. Before they went to bed, my father put in my mother's eye drops, took her blood sugar to make sure it wasn't too low because he would have her eat something. He would take her toothbrush and her toothpaste and carry it from the bathroom to the living room, because with mobility issues, she sits at the kitchen table to brush her teeth, go into the bedroom, close the blinds, bring in cold water, turn down the bed, and turn on the fan. And every single night before I could go to sleep, as exhausted as I was carrying out his contract. And it was carrying the toothbrush and the toothpaste from the bathroom to the kitchen every night that made my head explode. So when I realized that, I thought, I can't keep this up. I'm going to lose my health and my sanity. So not that night, not at night, not at the moment it was happening, but at a point where we were with one another in a relationship where it's very calm and very quiet and just chatting, I was able to say to her, Mom, I am exhausted and overwhelmed by the time it's bedtime. We need to change something in your routine getting ready for bed. It would really help me if we could keep the toothbrush and the toothpaste in the kitchen every night so you could get them and take that off to my plate. Where would you like to keep them? Now, I want to tell you my exact words because this becomes really important, right? I'm gonna bypass this for right now, and we can come back to it later. We talked about how important language is, right? So when I talked to my mom about a new expectation, I didn't say, you need to be in charge of your toothbrush, your toothpaste, right? It was an I statement. I am overwhelmed and exhausted. Okay. And then I followed it up with kind of a reason for that. It would be helpful if we could find a new place for a place to keep it in the kitchen. And here's the key, okay? The key for me is not that I said, what do you think, right? Because if I had said, what do you think? And she said, no, where do I go from there? The key for me was I said, where would you like to put it, right? So it wasn't at the moment I was frustrated and tired. It was at a place that we were both comfortable. And my motivation, I had to know what my mother's motivation was. And the motivation for my mom was absolutely worrying about my health. She wanted to keep me healthy. Okay. So again, non-threatening I'm exhausted and overwhelmed, and then a comment, it would really help me if, an expression of concern, right? Open-ended question or option. Where would you like to put this? Because then we were able to negotiate where it was going to go. Now, that particular conversation, I didn't use what I call the drip method, but I have used it all the time. And I'm going to go back to the comment that our listener made earlier. The drip method is where you bring up the same subject in that non-threatening way with an expression of concern, open-ended question or option, and then you let it go. And then you bring it up again at a different time or place, and then you let it go. If you can't get over the finish line, then I have figured out that I can bring in someone else who my mother considers a voice of authority to help me. Sometimes with her, like with her doctor, I prep him. Sometimes I just say, can you talk to my mom about this? Because let's face it, you and your spouse or you and your parent have a long history. And sometimes they really just don't want to hear it from you. But if someone else they respect says it to them, all of a sudden it becomes, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. But that idea of not using language that puts blame on them, expressing concern and getting from no to yes with an open-ended question and realizing it's not going to be one and done has served me over the last 7 years. In fact, to go back to my story, it wasn't very long after we negotiated and put the toothbrush and toothpaste in a particular drawer in the kitchen that my mother said to me, I really could put the eye drops in. Like, great. Mom, that would be fantastic. While you're doing that, I'll get the bedroom set up. That, for me, was feeling heard and validated. And I so appreciated my mother doing that. And I thanked her for it. Okay. So how do you support one another? It gets back to how to feel loved, validated, and concerned. I'll tell you a quick story. My mom was their social calendar for my mom and dad. And when my dad died, everybody started to text me or Facebook me, IM me, and say, "Hey, the family's getting together. We really would like your mom and you to join us." One time I was with her and I was sitting on the couch and I said to her, "Oh, Sue just texted. Family's getting together on Sunday. They want us to join them." And my mother was very quiet. And she said to me, "I feel like I died." And I went, "Mom, what do you mean?" Now, I could have said, "What are you, crazy? That's stupid. That's ridiculous." But there was such hurt in her voice that I listened to. I was able to say, "What do you mean?" And she said to me, "Ever since your father died, People text you, people Facebook you, and I can't do it because I'm blind. I feel like I died. I feel like I'm invisible. I said, oh, okay. Turned around and texted my cousin, and I said to her, we're coming, but I need you to call and invite my mother. This is what she's feeling. And then I made sure all the other family heard that as well. She needs you to call. This is how she feels loved and validated by being the one you guys come to. Do they check with me ahead of time to make sure we're going to be free? Yes, but they call her. And that makes a huge difference in her, not feeling isolated and not feeling depressed. The other thing I want to talk to you about is how often our childhood experiences influence our needs and expectations. My mom's needs are very different than mine. My mother's very traditional Italian, right? I don't understand them often, but I need to respect them and support them. And I try and get her to understand my thing as well, how I feel validated and supported. And that is what binds our relationship together. And that is what makes us a team in a way that, quite frankly, I didn't know we would ever get to in the very beginning. I'm going to do one more slide, Steve, and then I'm going to go and open up for questions. So the final thing is what are the social outlets and shared interests? Mom's Italian. I'm her sous chef. We cook together. That was a big part of my life growing up. So it's important to me. With the weekends, I'm with her because my mom has live-in care 24/7, except every other weekend when I'm her live-in caregiver, every holiday, every doctor appointment. And I try very hard to do something, either make a dinner with her or maybe bake blueberry muffins where she can be a part of that process, because that's part of our shared interests growing up. And my mother loves to play cards. So not as often, but as often as possible, I try and get us to play cards. I recognize that as time goes on, what were your shared interests, you may not be able to keep them. Like my mother and I have had to give up cards because her sight has gotten so bad, she can't even see the big ones. So we're trying to figure out what are those other things we can do. Sometimes it's just getting her out of the house and going for a drive. That's enough, because in that car, we're talking about family. We're anticipating a place we're going to be that will be fun. Will you have to modify these? Absolutely, as time goes on. But committing to finding a new one and then doing it and not just being task focused is a huge part of healing a relationship. It really is. So Steve, any questions or comments to date?
Wow, no, this has been great. So a question related to, do you have siblings, and any advice on sort of a lot of the challenges that people are faced with is, one sibling having to do everything or one sibling wanting to do everything.
Yeah. So the answer to that is yes. The short answer is yes. I will say that I have a brother who lives 12 hours away, and he's not in great health. So I do not have the expectation of him that he's going to come and care for mom and give me a weekend off. That's not something that's going to happen. I could be angry about that, or I can choose to let it go. And because he and I agree on the care for my mom, and because he has said to me, I recognize, I'm not there, he and his wife support us in other ways. One of the ways they support my mom, and through my mom, me, he pays to have the lawn mowed and the snow blown every summer and winter. Like, not having to worry about that because I live an hour away is such a gift. My mom needed a new refrigerator. They sent us a check. So their help is more from a financial aspect because they're so far away. And then also agreement. I will say, and this is where setting boundaries come in. It's interesting to me because we decided to do a reverse mortgage, and my brother and I were in complete agreement. It was my sister-in-law that pushed me on that. Well, let's get a loan out. I'm like, Carol, we have to start paying the loan back right away. That doesn't help us long-term. Well, let's buy the house. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to have a second mortgage. Well, I don't like reverse mortgages. Educated on those. Finally, in like the fifth discussion, I said to her, do you have another suggestion? She said, no. I said, so we're done. Like, I just stopped the discussion. If you don't have another suggestion that I can make work, we are done with this conversation. What I realized, and this is why I'm not angry with her, right? What I realized in conversation is that my sister-in-law, her siblings bought their family home because they are attached to that home, that physical home, in the way my brother and I are not. And once I saw that, I said, okay, I know where it's coming from. I know where the push is from. I can respect that, but that's not the way Kevin and I feel. We feel like my parents worked and saved their entire life. And if the reverse mortgage is going to give my mother what she needs. Okay. First thing, siblings. I'm going to go back to you for just a moment. Family dynamics in the very beginning. I don't care if there are 2 children or 5. Every child has a different childhood because the relationship with the parents are typically different. That is 90% of the time. You could talk to one sibling and say, oh, my dad was such a pain. And another sibling said, oh, dad was great. So I'm going to ask you to think about the relationships you guys had as a child. Maybe they're not willing to help because mom and they fought all the time and they're just resistant to it. Maybe they're not willing to help because you were older and they felt like you always told them what to do. And so that's bubbling to the top for them. So thinking about the relationships that you had with the siblings and what they had with whoever you're caring for can give you insight into either way to talk to them or ways to let it go. Okay. Here's the thing. You cannot change anybody's emotions. You can only deal with your own. And so I talk about family of origin versus family of choice. We have unspoken expectations of our family of origin, our siblings, based on how we do things. But I've already said, not everybody does things the way you want them to, right? And so if for whatever reason your family of origin can't help or won't help in the way you want them to or need them to, then I'm going to say you have family of choice around you. It's your friends, it's your church, it's the Office on Aging. Instead of banging your head against the wall, work really hard to just let it go. Let it go. It will give you peace and them grace, and you can work on your family of choice and what they need.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because I've seen in the caregiving situation where the choice, where mom wants to stay at home is that even if you've got this lovely relationship, if you have to get in the car and drive an hour to go grocery shopping for mom or what have you, it's far less convenient for a friendly neighbor that's 2 houses down that can do the grocery trip every time they go shopping. But I tell you, you've really, everything that you have been sharing is very common sense, but it's amazing how when we get wrapped up in the emotion of caregiving, I like how you talk about these opportunities that you had to be angry, because I talk to those angry siblings and family members every day of the week. And if you take a step back and you really kind of survey your relationship over time and the situation and create some empathy, it can be a very healing process for children and their loved ones.
100%. It really, really can. Yeah. But it takes self-awareness and willing to grow and change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you brought up a couple of topics that are very consistent themes in our discussions. First off, I was delighted that you said we've got a reverse mortgage. In fact, I think I probably would like to invite you back on and we can just sort of talk about that whole decision-making process. But I think one thing that I know that our audience is curious about is that mom has clearly chosen to age in place and stay in her home, which makes a reverse mortgage an option. But have you and your loved ones had the conversation about what will there be a point when the home is not appropriate, and how that decision making would occur?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you asked that question, because early on, when I first became my mother's caregiver, my mom's house is now 64 years old. My mother uses a walker, what I call her go-kart, in the house. If she ever had to move to a wheelchair full time, she cannot stay in that house. The hallways are too small. The doorways are too small. We do not have the wherewithal to make those changes. And so early on, I said to my mother, Mommy, you need to keep strong and keep using your wheelchair and keep doing things in the house, because you can't stay here if you have to be in a wheelchair. Now, that was really hard for her to hear. And I want to say to people, too often, particularly in the beginning when we become a caregiver, we promise something to our loved one that we don't know we can deliver because they feel vulnerable and we feel guilty, right? And that is a huge mistake, because then if you have to back off that promise, it's blindsiding them, it's hurtful, you feel even more guilty. So from the very beginning, I let my mom know, you cannot stay here in a wheelchair. I also, said to my mom, we have this much money to keep you in your home. After that, you can't stay here, so we are going to have to look at Medicaid. And we already started that process, because she's got about another 2 years. Now she's going to be 90, who knows, but her dad and his siblings lived into 91, 92, right? I don't know what's going to happen. I think one of the hardest things you have to do as a caregiver is take a caregiver hat off and put an actuarial hat on. That just is awful.
Well, and it's really hard for a parent who has been sort of talking about and guiding their children to hear their children speaking to them in a manner like that. And that can be challenging. On that, you talked about it briefly there, is that the phrase that I think a lot of people utter, that they don't realize the impact that it has on them and the people around them, is never take me, never put me here, never do this to me. Like, making a statement like that, a blanket statement, can be very challenging, especially if there's cognitive decline, because they remember that conversation, and now the only safe place for them to be is in a secure community. But wow, your discussion with you and your family members is really inspirational. However, there's nothing about it that sounds easy. That's for sure.
No, it's not. And let me tell you, I'm 7 years into this and I still get angry and frustrated, and I still don't have the best of conversations because I'm exhausted or tired or overwhelmed. But I will say my mom and I are a team. We can get mad with one another and we have to walk away. but we can go back because we forged this team. We can go back and talk about it. I mean, the biggest part of the contract I broke between my mom and dad was saying to her, I can't keep you in this house if you need a wheelchair. Because my mother said years ago when I was in the room, I'm only leaving this house in a pine box feet first.
Right. No, that's one of those statements that a lot of people state. And when I hear them say it, I say, you really need to rethink this, because it may be very difficult to accomplish that. And you're creating a lot of turmoil for your kids to meet those wishes. And if they can't meet those wishes, think of all the guilt that they're going to have.
Yeah. And I would take that a step further and say, yeah, everybody wants to age in place. What are you doing to make that happen? Mm-hmm. What are you doing in terms of finances? What are you doing in terms of your home? What are you doing in terms of support network? Because to make that blanket statement and then not have done the work, no, I will challenge an elder on that.
Yeah.
And I'll help you find resources, but no.
Yeah. Let's see. Question came in. What do you do when your loved one isn't acknowledging decline? This is very sad and very common. But any tips on that? Because I know this is a big challenge that our audience deals with.
Yeah. So what I would say is, if you can safely help them realize it themselves. If you can safely help them realize it themselves. So, for example, like during COVID, my mother had 2 wounds and such a severe eye infection, she lost the rest of her sight. It was not a good time to going back and forth to doctors, but we had to do it, right? Now, what has happened since then, and my mother was really resistant to this, was she finally had to say, I really need more help because I've lost my eyesight. And she was able to say that because she would want to do something or she wanted to do it. And I say, Mom, let's you and I do it together. Right? Like, my mother's legally blind, but she has a black knife and a white cutting board and she still cuts stuff up. And she'll say to me, oh, these are not even. And I'm like, don't worry about it. They'll still cook. Right. So, but in allowing her to do that, she's recognizing that she has further limits. People are probably going to think I'm a horrible human being, but when she went into the hospital, we didn't know she had a wound that was bad. And she didn't feel good for 2 days. And I kept saying to her, particularly that day, I kept saying to her, Mom, I really think we need to call the EMTs. You need to be checked out. No. This went on for several hours. Finally, we were at dinner. I said, okay, let's get into the living room. Now, when my mom gets herself up, right? Not easily. Steve, I spent a half an hour saying, what do you want me to do to help you? What do you want me to do? I don't understand why I can't get up. I don't understand. When she sat back down and said, I can't get up, I said, now may I call the EMTs? And she let me. My heart was racing. I called my sister-in-law, who's a nurse, to tell her what was going on. Here's the voice of authority. I said, now we can call the EMTs. Mom, talk to Carol. Yes, call them. And she wound up in the hospital for a week. Now, should I have forced it and called it earlier? Maybe. Fortunately, it worked out okay. But let me tell you, my mother is Sicilian, right? Like, if you're Italian, you understand what I mean. She is stubborn. And allowing her to make that choice in a way that I still felt relatively safe, it was her choice. And she didn't fight me on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is great suggestions. And I think every parent in the audience recognizes that these are skills eventually how we change behavior in our children. And again, that's part of the problem, is it's sort of like these are adults that have lived long, amazing lives. And so we have to be careful between the fine line of parenting our parents and what have you, but great suggestions and great response to that. Couple of questions. Okay, so you mentioned your mom is legally blind, but she's not 100% blind, correct?
She can see like light and shadows. So when she's going from the kitchen to go into the living room, when the front door's open and it's a bright day, she knows to head towards that, and then she turns. Sometimes she turns into the wall before she gets there, but that's okay. It's gotten to the point now where she says to me, I'm going to go in the living room, would you follow me? She never asked that before. But at night when the door is closed, I have to be more careful, because if she doesn't turn and she hits the wall, she's disoriented.
Yeah.
But she's recognizing these changes, and even though she doesn't like it, she's recognizing it and she's letting me help her.
That's good. Now, have you found any technology that seemed to help? A lot of people with low vision, seems the Amazon Alexa or Google Home is invaluable for making phone calls and listening to books and things of that nature.
Yeah, that's actually my story when I talk about the drip method. I won't go into it because we're running out of time, but she finally allowed me to give her, we had drip method, a full year of conversation. Let's get an Alexa, it could do this, right? And I wanted to get her for the phone calls, right? I became part of a pilot project and we got an Alexa for free. And my mother was like, free? I'll take it. There was the motivation. It was free. Put the Alexa in her living room. And she finally said to me after a year of conversation, I don't want to use it for the phone because I'll have no privacy. I'm like, well, that makes sense. But guess what? Every single light in the living room is hooked up to a smart plug, and she just turns the lights on and off at will for the first time in years because she doesn't have the mobility to stand up. Then during COVID, she wanted to be able to listen to books on tape. So she asked for one for her bedroom. And she has a headphone and she will listen to the news or listen to a book on Audible if she can't sleep. When she lost more of her eyesight, we put one in the kitchen because when she writes the grocery list now, I can't read it. So we have a grocery list on Alexa, right? We have a list of everything that's in her freezer and refrigerator so she knows. So for somebody who is blind, she has taken to Alexa after much resistance, but in ways I never anticipated.
I love it. Any other low vision products or technologies that you are using that you might want to share for some other folks that are in that same situation?
She loves listening to books on tape and recording for the blind, has all kinds of authors. It's a free service. They mail them, you mail them back, you tell the genres and the authors that you like, and that really keeps it going. My mother can no longer see television, but we've gotten her headphones and she will listen while I'm watching. So when we're together, we take her favorite shows that we have taped and we listen to them together. It's another way. There's that shared interest that binds your relationship together. Her TV is 2 steps into a den and she got too nervous going down the steps. So we figured out she could listen with her earphones in the living room.
Great. Wow. Once again, we're getting towards the top of the hour, but we got a few questions and comments in here. First, sure. I want to share, Donna Plotnick says, you're right, Debra. As a senior advisor, so many children do not have these conversations with their loved ones. The only thing is going on Medicaid up front without some assets is going to be difficult to find a community. So be careful about that as you're spending down the 2 years of assets.
Let me just say, and this, I want people to know this. When my dad died, we went after VA aid and attendant benefits and we put a trust in place. And then in New Jersey, there's something called a qualified income trust. So all my mother's assets go into that. So her assets are actually protected. But Donna is 100% right. Finding a facility that doesn't require a year or 2 years of spend down will be a challenge. And this is that actuarial hat you have to wear. When does that break point come?
Yeah.
It will keep me, it does sometimes keep me up at night.
No. And also the caregiver contract is the line in the sand that you and your loved ones are going to take. I can't tell you how many families I talked to over the years who are paying for their their mom or dad's care in a community that they really wanted them to be in, not recognizing how long they were going to live and how much it was going to cost, and sacrificing their own retirement. And, thinking about that is very important. And it's very tough to sort of, okay, mom's out of money. She needs to use subsidized options as opposed to us footing the bill. Let's see. R.H. Levine asks, Alexa for the phone, what does this mean? So what, I'll make sure to put in chat a link to some of the discussions we've had on voice technology. But the Amazon Alexa and the Google Home product, you can actually basically say, Alexa, call my daughter, and it's a speaker and a microphone, and you can talk to your daughter basically just by sitting anywhere near the speaker. And it's been amazing for people with low vision or no vision, because you don't need to utilize, pressing the buttons on a phone.
I just will also say, think if you're going to do that, I would say get them headphones, because there's a headphone jack. It's way easier to hear on headphones. My mom struggles with Alexa because her voice is a female voice. So I understand they now or are about to have a male voice. I think I'm going to change it and see that, if that helps her at all.
Oh, that's great. Alex. So let's see. Well, Debra, this has been delightful. If you want to sort of wrap up with some closing statements, your story is great, and I'm definitely going to have you come back. And I really want to have you come back and talk about the whole process of getting a reverse mortgage, because that is very confusing. And hearing from somebody that actually evaluated and did it, I think would be very important to people.
Sure, I would love to. I will just say that feel free to contact me. I do. This is an overview of all the concepts in the book. And I even left out a couple of them because we ran out of time, but that's okay. But each one of those concepts has its own particular presentation, like how do you ask for and say yes to help? How do you set a boundary? And I have absolute strategies. I'll give you one for asking for and saying yes to help, and I'll tell you how to do it. You are much better served saying to somebody, can you walk the dog, is not a good ask for help. But saying to somebody, can you walk the dog Thursdays and Tuesdays between 5 and 7 is, because then you can negotiate. So I deconstruct that. Please feel free to contact me if you would like to talk more. The book is out on Amazon. Feel free to call, just leave a message, because I don't answer it if I don't recognize it. And the final thing I want to say is just that I'm so excited to be able to share that, what am I thinking? That
the book, audio book.
Thank you. That in November, the book will come for National Caregivers Book Month. The book will come out in an audio version, and the book will come out in Spanish, working with somebody translating it. So if you have a big Spanish population, it will be available to them as well. And at the end of every chapter is a worksheet or questions to help you work through what was discussed.
This is amazing. You are really a great resource. I'm so glad that our paths have crossed, and I urge our audience to reach out to you. I dropped your contact information into chat, but this won't be the last time we hear from Debra. I'm definitely going to work on getting you back on, and congrats on everything. And you're really doing a great job of helping open our eyes to the ways that we can better serve our loved ones. So this is great.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for the opportunity, and good luck to everybody who was on with us.
I love it. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.